So the next thing we'll look at is the mouth. There are some kind of larger structures around the mouth again, but from a kind of practical point of view drawing, you don't have to be super concerned with them. One thing to be aware of is the fact that you tend to get this sort of bulging out, so stuff bulges out a lot more in the mouth, in the face, than you sort of usually think of. So we were talking about with the eyes, so generally the eyes kind of bulge out more than perhaps is commonly thought of, and the mouth does as well. So the lips kind of can form almost like a muzzle, or a kind of, it's more pronounced in other animals obviously, but that kind of where the mouth projects forward from the rest of the skull. So the teeth, we see it quite clearly on the skeleton, although I had the skull angled wrong there, so the jaw's a bit crazy. I'll find a different one. You can sort of see on this one, there's that sort of angle forward, so all of that projects forward, and it creates this kind of like a bit more volume to the way the mouth projects out. So you don't want to think of the mouth as flat, I suppose, is the main thing. So you don't want to think of it like, oh, it's just this flat shape on the front of the face. It does have like a bit of a angle out and then an angle back in, angle out and back in. So that's quite crucial. Sort of that form that sits underneath the nose is this sort of shape that projects forward, angles back in to this bottom bit, and then it projects forward again where the chin juts out. So you've got these sort of lots of kind of forms that angle, they go out and then they go back in, they go out and back in. We'll see that really clearly on this guy, obviously, because we're going to look at his, we see it more obviously from the side. But even on her, you want, there's just a slight sense that that's bulging forward slightly through the center. You don't have to draw that in, it's just something to be useful, something useful to be aware of. So if I was to draw a center line for her mouth, that's what I'd probably start with. The next thing I would look for is, again, what's the width? Where does the mouth stop? So for her, the mouth stops about there on either side. And then it's useful to be aware of the center point. So the center point is usually a sort of a purse where the lips are pursed. Then as we start to elaborate it, you get rid of the average. So when we first start, we put just a straight line across, but actually it's important to note there's these undulations through the mouth. And there are different ways of conceptualizing the mouth. Sometimes people do it and it's just sort of it's like two round forms at the bottom. So two round forms there, and then they do sort of two round forms at the top, which you can do, but I tend not to find it as quite as useful as another method where they put one round form, so they do the two round forms at the bottom, then they do a central kind of almost bean-shaped form in the middle, and then round forms on either side of that. So you end up with sort of 5 forms basically that the mouth is made up of. And that sort of captures the little kind of divot that you get more or less degrees. Like this is actually quite a variable thing in faces, but at the top lip, that little curve back. Again, you don't have to draw that in, it's just something to sort of be aware of in terms of shapes. What I would tend to go for when I start drawing a mouth, so we've got the corner, they're always really crucial. I kind of look for the occlusion shadow, so I was talking about certain places where the lips are more or less pursed. You tend to get slightly darker accents to the mouth. And an important thing with the mouth is not to make it just kind of even all the way across. You tend to get in the center, very center of the mouth, and the corners of the mouth, and sometimes a little bit, you can sort of see a little bit through there, a little bit through here on this one. Just slightly darker accents, but that's always a kind of good starting point for the mouth when you're drawing it in, particularly in this sort of situation where nothing is really super shadowy. When you've got a very strong shadow on the mouth, it's a bit clearer. But when you don't have a strong shadow on the mouth, just try to focus in on those occlusion shadows. So you can see it very clear. If I go back, you can see those dark notes. We've got a dark note there, got a thick dark shadow, little triangle shape here, another little dark note. But you can also see, I'll go back actually and redraw this, because it's very quite complex this mouth form. So if we start to break it down, we've got that little shape in the corner of the mouth there, this shape here, and then these sort of undulating forms. So those little angle back in this mouth are all quite complex, but you can see one of the main things is this sort of shape of the mouth is not just a straight line across, it angles back and curves and turns around a lot. So the mouth, one of the main things with the mouth is it's not usually as simple as it seems, and it's always very good to look for those, where are those darker notes and where are those lighter notes, because where the lips don't purse in quite as much or crease as much, you tend to get almost like no shadow at all, like they kind of just merge into another. You can see here those tones sort of merge, but then at this point it's much darker. But generally beyond that, there's usually a little shadow that sits at the bottom of that sort of muzzle shape. On her it's very small, but it is somewhat evident. So you've got this little shadow down here, and then the form sort of curves back up to the bottom lip and then catches light at the top, and then you've got a similar sort of thing happening at the bottom of the top lip. So the bottom of the top lip is a bit darker down there, and then it curves up again and it gets lighter. And if I was to kind of map out those bigger structures of the face, that's what we've sort of got going on, and then the chin below. But that should hopefully give you an idea of how that mouth roughly works. So we can have a look through this guy now. Just going to lighten this off a little bit as well. So again, the way I'd approach it is we would start with wrong tool. Start with that line that runs across the center of the mouth, then find what are the two edges. A little tip actually is finding alignments that run through the whole face are often quite useful. So if I was to draw a straight line up, or actually do it properly straight, so straight line up from the corner of the mouth, where does that roughly hit on the eye is often a useful thing to do, or a straight line up from here hits just sort of to the left of the center of that eye. And that often helps with kind of getting the placement of the edges of the mouth correct. You can also just generally think of, the corner of the mouth is that much further out from the edge of the nose on that side, and it roughly hits the tip of the nose on the right hand side. So those alignments are often quite useful, getting these forms to align or work together, function together correctly. So we've got the outer sort of extremes of his mouth in place now. Then the next thing we want to look for is just these sort of, where is it darker? Where does it get a little bit, kind of maybe the tone would be a bit thinner or lighter. So that gives us the center of the mouth. Then again, this sort of shadow shape at the bottom is always really important to find. Because there's always that angle back below the bottom lip, it very often has some kind of darker tone or shadow shape. And that gives us the sort of form of the bottom lip very quickly. And then we can find the sort of general shadow shape of the top lip. I generally wouldn't go, you don't want to go too sharp with these forms, so you can see how soft those transitions are. So even if it's a shadow, it's still quite a soft transition rolling up into his lips. You get some people with sort of sharper lips, but very often lips are softer than you think. That's another thing to be aware of. So that's why I would say, if you're looking for kind of the highest contrast parts of a mouth, this is where you want to look first, those creases in the center of the mouth. Generally you get a darker shadow at the bottom of the bottom lip, and then these shadows you have to be a bit more careful with. If you put them in too strongly, they'll come out looking a bit too kind of heavy, and it makes the mouth look a lot harder than the mouth would often be. So yeah, that's how I would start this guy. So I've not elaborated enormously all the forms. That would be something we would find with adding halftones in, but forgetting all the kind of crucial notes, crucial measurements for the proportions, that's a good starting point. This guy's probably a terrible example of a mouth because he's got a moustache, but we'll go through him anyway. There is a slight suggestion. So we've got the bottom of his, so that's his bottom lip there. And we can make assumptions. So if you were drawing this, you would have to make assumptions about what's actually happening, like where do his lips sit. And we know that this is the top of the bottom, sorry, the top of the top lip is here. And then most likely it wouldn't curve backwards. So there's going to be a point where we get a little bit of a curve forwards to the top, the kind of middle of his top lip, then that would angle back in. We know that the corner of the mouth is roughly about here. So again, the corner of the mouth sits in quite far. I'm going to actually use, I've got another profile one we'll go through because it'll be a bit clearer than this one, I think. But we can make assumptions about, so that's the corner of the mouth would sit back in there. And then his top lip would angle back to the bottom lip, and then the chin would sort of project forwards. But again, we don't see loads of it, so that's sort of like an assumption. Probably the most important thing is just to be aware of, again, the fact that this sits sort of, the corner of the mouth sits further back than you would think. It's not like the mouth is flat, it bends, so it's that bending of the mouth is really important. I'll just have a look. I do have another one in profile, but she might be... Oh yeah, here we go. This will be a bit clearer. We'll go through her. So again, if we were drawing her, we would have already had the sort of the center of the eye line would run at that angle, base of the nose would be this angle, mouth would be sort of in a parallel line. Then we've got the side plane of the nose there, and what we would look for to begin with is just where is the edge of her mouth, how far back does it sit, so we've got that point. We would then just check for, actually it seems pretty much like a kind of a fairly straight line back. Got the corner of the mouth in there, and then in profile what we would then try to find are these sort of how far, like what's the distance of the top lip, how does it angle back up towards this the crease that forms below the nose. So we've got those two forms, so top lip goes out, then angles back in above, then the bottom lip projects out, and then we've got bottom of the bottom lip angles back in, and then this is where we always find this shadow on the other ones, and still a shadow in there. Then from there we've got the chin that projects out. And what I'd recommend, so something that's important with profiles, is if this is the top of the face and this is the bottom of the face, start, as I say, with these placements of where's the nose sit between those 2 points, where do the eyes sit between those 2 points, and where does the mouth sit, and then find the smaller undulating forms after that. So find the nose after that point. Don't work from one side to the other. If you work from one side to the other, most likely you'll find at some point you'll have got proportions wrong and you'll have too little space for the chin, or the chin will be too big or something like that. So work from the outside extremes. So we work from the top and bottom, so that's the top of the forehead, bottom of the chin. Start with where do the eyes sit, where does the nose sit. Once you've got those in place, you can say, well, how close is the center of the mouth to the bottom of the nose? And so you've already you're breaking the bigger chunks into smaller chunks, rather than, it would be a mistake to draw it and try to kind of start at the bottom and then what's that angle and what's this angle and that angle and that angle, because any mistakes start to amplify. Once you get up to the top, you'll have made mistakes that will not leave enough space. So it's always better to start with the top and bottom extreme and kind of cut them in half as a way of working. But yeah, we've only got a few more minutes, so pretty much covered, hopefully, everything. So we've had a look at eyes, nose and mouth. As I say, ears are not sort of super crucial. I might try to do like a little tiny ear video at some point that I can put up for free on the course. or on the website.